Good evening, class. So today we will be discussing the most prominent topic of our mathematics session, and we will be discussing the fundamental of mathematics. The fundamental of mathematics includes the first part, the very first part, which we will be discussing today is the coordinate geometry. So the topic name is the coordinate geometry. Coordinate geometry. As the name suggests, it is when we will bifurcate this coordinate geometry, it will be divided into two parts. One is the coordinate and the other part is the geometry part. As we already knew that geometry, which we had already studied in the previous classes, and we had already discussed on this topic also regarding this concern, that geometry we were discussing mainly on the surface parts, that is two-dimensional or three-dimensional part will be there, that is cone, cylinder, volume of sphere. These parts are we were discussing in the you can say for this geometry part. When we are adding the other word, that is the coordinate geometry, which we will be applying this, basically this science, this mathematics, it is applicable for the space research and organization part. The planets which are moving in the upper space, how they are moving, what is their coordinates in the space, what is their position in the space. So for determining all these parts, we are using the very you can say we are using this topic, we are using the fundamentals of this aspect so as to find the you can say various parameters of the space. So starting from the beginning, we will be discussing this coordinate geometry starting from the beginning part. So basically the first thing which we will be knowing in this, it is the axis. The axis part. The axis part, it is basically we know in this we had already dealt in the you can say surface geometry, that we were discussing about the 2D two-dimensional part. We were discussing mainly the length and breadth, that is the x-axis and the y-axis. Now in this coordinate geometry, we will be dealing with the two coordinates as well as the one coordinate, that is z-axis, that is x-axis, y-axis and z-axis. But when we are starting from the beginning, from the very first point, we will be discussing about the x-axis and y-axis mainly. So first of all, according to the conventional rule, this is the origin. Origin is the midpoint of, or it is the intersection point of both the axes, that is the x-axis and y-axis. It is the x dash and x, and y dash. Understood? So this is the mainly the it is the conventional sign which we are using, which we will be applying in this coordinate geometry. This particular diagram, the schematic diagram which we have drawn here, it will be basically used for determining the location of a particular point in the space, whether that point it is lying in the two-dimensional or it is lying in the three-dimensional. Suppose first and foremost, we will discuss some of the basic point in this diagram. This quadrant, this diagram, it is divided into four quadrants. It is the first quadrant, it is the second quadrant, it is the third quadrant, and it is the fourth quadrant. Understood? So as I had written here, first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant and fourth quadrant. The first quadrant, the very first quadrant, in this the first quadrant is that in this both the x coordinate and the y coordinate both will be positive, irrespective of any coordinate. In this coordinate, the first quadrant, in the first quadrant, the both x value and the y value, these two both values will be positive. X, y, this both value will be positive. In the second quadrant, this is the second quadrant, this is the first quadrant, this is the second quadrant. In the second quadrant, the x axis, that is the x minus x, and y will be positive. X will be negative and y will be positive. In the second quadrant, the x will be negative and the y will be positive. In the third quadrant, In the third quadrant, we will be discussing here. In the third quadrant, both the x and y both will be negative. In the third quadrant, both the coordinates minus x and minus y, it will be negative. Both the values will be negative, minus x and minus y. In the fourth quadrant, only the y coordinate will be negative and the x will be positive. In the fourth quadrant, the x value will be positive and the y coordinate will be negative. Understood? So this is the basic nomenclature of any point which will be lying in the first quadrant, irrespective of quadrants. First quadrant, if any point, suppose if any point it is given 2, 3, if any point it is given plus 2, plus 3. So I had already told you that particular point plus 2 and plus 3, it will be lying in the first quadrant. Understood? If any point it is given plus 2, x value is plus 2 and the y value is minus 3. As I had already used, the plus x and minus y. So plus 2 and minus 3, it will be lying in the fourth quadrant. So this particular diagram, this basic which we are applying to trace the location of a particular point in the space, and it is applicable, it is extended for only two-dimensional. When we will be applying this particular formula for three-dimensional, in that case one more axis will come into picture, that is entitled as z-axis. So in that coordinate, one more place will be there, plus x plus y plus z plus x plus y minus x minus y minus z. So that we will be dealing later. That will be you can say third dimensional. We will be dealing later. Now we will be completely focusing on the two-dimensional only. That is x-axis and the y-axis. Understood? So basically we will be dealing with a different part. Pause. So as in the earlier page we had discussed about the schematic diagram of the axis, that is this one. This is the first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant and fourth quadrant. In the first quadrant, both the axis will be positive. In the second quadrant, the x will be negative, y will be positive. In the third quadrant, both will be negative. In the fourth quadrant, only the x will be positive and y will be negative. It will be plus plus. Understood? So that is the schematic diagram of the particular axis, x-axis and y-axis. Suppose we are taking one example. Suppose a point is there. Point is P. It is entitled as P and the coordinates are 2, 3. Suppose it is given the P is the particular point in a space whose the coordinates are given 2, 3. So in this way, first of all, we will write in this one, that is x and y, in this form. First of all, we will write this particular point in this form, pxy. And what is given? Px is positive, that is plus 2, and y is also positive, that is plus 3. So this particular point, it will be, both the points are positive, both the coordinates are positive, that is plus plus. So according to this figure, this particular point will lie in the first axis. Okay. Now we will be considering one other example. Suppose a particular point is given P 2, 0. This is the particular point P 2, 0. This point is located somewhere in the space whose x coordinate is 2 and the y coordinate is 0. If this type of question is coming, in this case, we will first understand the fundamental behind this. The x-axis is 2, the value of x coordinate is 2 and the y is 0. So when y will be 0? Y will be 0 if and only if that particular point will lie on the x-axis. No matters whether the point is negative or positive, but if that coordinates lie on the x-axis, then we will say easily that the y coordinate will be 0. So according to that, suppose here is x's value is 2. So this particular point, so the point will lie here. The y coordinate will be 0 because on the x-axis, irrespective of negative or positive, the y coordinate will be 0. So this particular point will lie on the x-axis. And x is positive, so it will lie on the positive direction of the x-axis. In this case, if it is given P minus 2, 0, So p minus 2 0, what is, and the x value is negative. So x value will be negative here. In which direction? It will be in the left side. So this particular direction. So it will be minus 2. So x value will be minus 2, y value will be 0. So this particular point will lie on the x-axis only, but on the left side of the axis, that is negative x-axis. So that is the concept behind this. Suppose we are considering another one example. We will be considering one example in which both the values are negative. Suppose a particular point P is there whose x-axis is minus 2 and y-axis it is minus 3. Y coordinate, x coordinate is minus 2 and the y coordinate is minus 3. So according to the figure which I had already discussed, according to that figure, this particular point will lie in the third quadrant. This particular point will lie in the third quadrant, where the x value is also negative and y value is also negative. Suppose in this case, P is given 0 minus plus 2. Suppose this question comes in the exam that on which quadrant this particular point will lie. So in this case, we will be applying the concept which we had used earlier, the x and y. The x value is 0 and the y value is plus 2. As we had already discussed, if such type of question comes, if one value is 0 and other value is plus 2, suppose the value which is numerical in that case, y value is plus 2, x value is 0. So this particular point will lie on the y-axis only, irrespective of the magnitude, whether it is negative or positive, but it lies on the y-axis and it will be on the upper side, that is the positive direction of the y-axis. So this particular point will lie here. X value is 0, y value is 2. Okay, suppose P 0 minus 2 is given. Again same concept we have to apply here. X value is 0 and y value is minus 2. So this particular point will lie on the y-axis only, but in the negative direction, that is 0 minus 2. Understood? So this is one of the example. So we will be taking two more examples so as to render more transparency on the concept which we had applied here. Suppose one more axis which we will be taking. P is given, x value is, it is given 4 and y value it is given minus 3. Okay. So applying the above concept, we will be writing this equation in the form of x, y. Here x value is 4 and y value is minus 3. So this particular value, this particular coordinates, it will lie on the fourth quadrant. So this particular coordinates, this particular point will lie on the fourth quadrant in which the x value is positive and y value is negative. Understood? We will be taking one more example. P, x value it is given minus 3 and y value it is given plus 2. So in this case, we will be writing this in the simpler form, standard form, x and y. In this case, the x value is negative and y value is positive. So applying the above formula and applying the above concept in this particular point will lie on the second axis of the coordinate axis. This particular point will lie on the second quadrant, where x value will be negative and y value will be positive. So these are some examples associated with the axis, and this is the concept which we had applied for determining the location of a particular point. This is basically the fundamental of mathematics, which we will be, and in the next class we will be discussing about the distance and section formula. Please subscribe this channel and thanking you for the same.